Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here with Eric, and I've wanted to be on with Eric for a long time. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Well,
This camera on my face. Look at this.
yes, you're right
There we
there.
go.
I'm
There
feeling
it is.
terrible now. I need to this first time then we do the face reveal. I'm definitely going to be on with you. We have to do it together.
There. Yeah, come and use up my system. It's
Yes,
at your disposal.
we'll do it. It's great to talk to you. You have a great channel. We'll talk about that in a moment. We were having a really nice
Yeah.
chat before. I could have just kept talking to you, and not gone live. We could have just done that. Like,
That wouldn't have been a disservice to your audience, man. We hit on a couple of really, really great things.
well, we'll definitely get into that, but we're looking forward to having a good conversation, everybody. Obviously, for people who don't know you, it
Yeah,
wouldn't be the case, but tell us about yourself real quick, so they know who you are.
sure. Let's see. Let's start with career first. I worked in the animation industry as a storyboard artist. I worked for Warner Brothers primarily, Cartoon Network on shows like Ben 10, Alien Force, and a lot of the direct videos for Warner Brothers. So anytime there was Superman or Batman, I was on that. One of my first gigs in animation was working as an environment designer and then eventually a storyboard for the Aeon Flux for MTV, a long, long time ago. So that kind of dates me. And whenever it was possible, I would try my hand at comics. I was never very good at it because I could never meet the prerequisite of making my deadline. So I did that sporadically, but when I could do it, it was a lot of fun. And currently, I work in the video game industry as a concept art designer.
Oh, very cool. And you managed to work. I think you have done some art for pretty much all the companies, haven't you? The
I
major.
think so. I think so. My memory always fails me. Somebody asked me once, like, have you ever done any designs for DC? I'm like, oh, that would be so awesome. And then I brought that up in a conversation. It's like, you dummy, you did all the designs for Martian Manhunter.
Yeah,
I was like, all right, right. Yeah.
there's always. Well, I mean, you've done a lot. I think you have your live stream. I'll put the links up there. If you are not following Eric, his channel is amazing, and you do incredible streams. Like,
Do I?
oh yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
I sit there and just like completely tune into that. And I was gonna
Yeah.
say zone out. That's the wrong word, but I mean, it's relaxing, and I love watching.
I think what do you call it? I don't know. I don't often reflect on it too much nowadays. Back when I was streaming on Twitch 3 years ago, maybe as many as four, I would really get obsessed about whether or not I was too, that fine line of entertaining and informative, right? And I always I over index on informative because it's the kind of stuff that I wish I had access to back when I was trying to get better at my craft.
Yeah.
So if it's information that I can give to somebody who's trying to get better, who's in whatever chapter of their own personal art growth, I want to give them as much information as I can, because the resources that artists have now, in contrast to what I used to have in trying to sort of have a better understanding of how to do something art related. Oh my gosh, man, it's like 100-fold, if not 1,000-fold. So
Yeah.
I have a tendency to over-index on crafts. And sometimes I think, oh, that comes off as a little boring, a little dry, but I'm glad you like it.
No, it's wonderful, and I think anybody who's trying to get into the business, say it's got to be a must view. I think, and you have a lot of.
Thank you so much.
They're excited you're here. They're telling me I can just leave and you can talk, and that'd be great.
That would be unfair. That would be unnecessary. Please stick around.
Speaking of which, I'm gonna have a glass of whiskey here as my standard. I don't know. It's always.
Right on.
Is anybody else? Are you have anything to drink tonight?
I just have I don't drink much alcohol, but I have a really simple but very powerful ginger beer here, and it helps settle my stomach this time of day.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good Moscow Mule as well. If you ever go that direction.
Yeah. Right.
Very nice. Well, I wanted to. So, like we said, this is where you can find yourself. I know there's other places, but you're easy to find. If you search your name on Google, you can come up with all the different things.
Yeah, right on, man. That is awesome.
We'll have to see if Sean Murphy stops by. We can compare the two Chrononauts artists here in one in one stream.
That would be a great battle royale. Actually, Sean helped establish the tone and tenor for that book, and I followed. I did chapter 2 right behind him, and it was all I could do not to go and refer to the chapters that he had done or the volume that he had done. So because I think just thematically it held on to the spirit of what Sean had established but as far as locales, it went the opposite direction. It went to the future instead. So it that fact alone saved me from myself to go back and look through all of Sean's pages and not just rip them off outright.
Well, stylistic could look great. It was a fun series, and you have this variant cover that you're promoting for this.
Right. That was out of nowhere that I'd reached out to Scott Snyder and I'd asked him, hey, if there's something that comes up on your rate. And it's weird because I am so uninformed what's out there right now, Perch, like he was already heavily either right in the middle of promotion, right at the beginning of the promotion, but they had already announced Noctera, right? And here I am, like some uninformed dummy going like, so what's going on with you, Scott? You think I could do a cover for you? Like hat in hand asking him for work. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And when I finally looked into it, I was like, all right, this thing's been going on for a while. I feel like a dum-dum.
Well, it looks great. I mean, anyway, the work is really cool. I think
Thank you.
The style is amazing. You do really detailed work, and I just think it's incredible. But
thank you.
I could be talking about that all night and bore everybody else here. We were talking before you went on there. You're talking about kind of manga and kind of some of the differences. It was a cool conversation. Do you think we should get back to that a little bit?
Let's do it, man. I mean, the way it came up is because I'm an avid fan of your show. Thank you so much for finding the tenacity and consistency to keep going. Right. I know, like I stream once a week. And I'm exhausted, right? Like I don't know if I need to do that anymore, But you upload videos 3 times a day. It feels like, if not more, less.
Yeah,
is that accurate?
It's ludicrous. Yeah, I the challenge is, I mean, when I go on the road, that's usually 3 or 4 videos getting recorded in the car, and so I come back and I can quickly process them. And then if I don't put them up quickly, they age out. Like
that makes sense.
50, 60 videos at least that just never go up because they're just the topic changes, and
Sure. Sure. And then, I mean, and you're pretty current on the stuff that you cover, either by way of, whatever it is that's happening immediately within the past couple of days, or at the very least, if from a 10,000-foot view, it informs on what's been happening within the past couple of days, right? So how we started that conversation. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ben.
No, please. Yeah. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how we started that conversation was based on me watching your videos. You had mentioned, I can't remember the exact title, but the thing that I wrote down here was to come and ask you about was you had mentioned that, manga growth, or you were talking about tracking manga growth in Japan. Mm-hmm. And I think you had officially gotten numbers, or you hadn't gotten numbers yet. But what I was really trying to dig into was the idea of like, where does that growth come from? And one of the theories that I proposed to you offline was like, is that cultural? And you had some really great, I think, pretty amazing, insightful answers.
Well, it's funny if you have gone over to Japan, it's a little bit different now because things have moved so much digital. But if 10 years ago, and I was spending a lot of time in Japan 20 years ago, I mean, I lived over in Japan for 6-9 months. And one of the things you see in the 90s and the 2000s is that manga was everywhere. It was like the news sound. It was like you're in the US, and it was but it was more. I mean, you'd come out of the train and you'd come up to just a street, and there'd be people with like tarps on the ground, and manga would be sold there on the street. And so it was because it was omnipresent and it was everywhere, it never really had that feeling of nerds read this or specialized people. It was like, it was culturally acceptable for everybody. Mm-hmm. You'd see, salarymen, and you'd see different people there just holding manga right next to kids. There was no differentiation. And so, and also I think part of it, because it's such a commuter society, it became the thing you read on the train. You have an hour. Right. That
was interesting. Can I follow up on that? You had same conversation offline. You had sensed something that it never dawned on me because of the cultural nuance of Japan. Right. Yeah. It was ideal for them not ideal, but it was accepted for them to read manga on the train, because it was, how did you put it? It was like, it was respectful, right? Like it wouldn't be too intrusive to anybody else around you.
That's right. It's really on the train when it did go digital. You'd have casual games, but you can't. You're not supposed to talk on your phone. You won't see people on their phone in the rail. And so reading books, reading manga is culturally polite and it's acceptable, an activity you can do yourself. And so you see a lot of people. You get on the train and you see tons of people sitting there of all ages reading manga, mostly digital days. And then the other piece is it was. Sorry, I got distracted by a comment here. The other piece, thanks, you murdered that guy. Always with that. It is. I completely derailed there.
You're all right.
It's been a long week. My multitasking abilities are completely shot at this point. It really is a case where you can very quickly pick it up. When manga did make the transition to digital, it was you're not carrying around a phone book anymore. You can have volumes and volumes in your hand, and that helps that transition as well. Just all in all, it was something that was naturally accepted by the culture there, and really helped.
Yeah. And then the other thing was, what was it that we touched on that I think was we had talked about how there were enough people in that business that that sort of responsibly predicted the geography of where we were going to go technology wise, and invested in the infrastructure of what they would eventually end up maturing to, which is reading everything online or on mobile, And I think that's pretty profound, right?
It really, the approach was just radically different between Japan and the US. And it's also, somebody else brought it up in the chat, and it's very true. Manga very early on was checking the box for a lot of different categories. You had horror, you had slice of life, sports, you had romance. There was never kind of just one category. So whatever you were into, you were going to find something that fit you. And so when it was clear that digital was going to be something, when the smartphone came out and the screens were a little bigger, a lot of the publishers basically started investing in this future that they knew was coming with digital. They knew that it was going to go there.
Even with clumsy technology, they still said, hey,
very clumsy technology. You got a picture, very cheap flip phones, black and white, terrible screens. And they were spending a lot of time with the artists about how stuff was going to get converted and how those, that was all going to be translated. There was just investment back into the system. Right. And by contrast, in 2016, this is 2006, pre-iPhone, in the US publishers were not taking it seriously at all. They were and I've told this story before, but there's this guy, Ira, who used to run the digital team for Marvel. And they basically had the approach of, if you want to do something, you can license it. You need to pay us 150 grand. Right. And then you can kind of do this content, but they wouldn't even, there was no exclusive to it or anything. And the only people developing for mobile back then with apps were tiny little companies. They didn't have that money. So as a result, nothing happened in the US. And, Japan just basically, and the other part, they tuned the content to really terrible phones. So as the technology improved and increased, everything just got progressively better. And it just grew up as an industry. And so now we find, I would say Japan in terms of the technology is a good, conservatively 15 years ahead of the US.
Yeah.
And
that's sobering.
Oh yeah. No, it's going to be very tough to catch up. But anyway, it's an interesting space. I do, we talk digital here. I know a lot of people who watch the channel are very allergic to digital. They they like print, and you get it. But I think it's also an indication though that, if they started worrying about this 15 years ago, I think a lot of people might have started to change their mind on digital, but they never, it hasn't just hit over here. So
I think I think you're right. I mean, everything you're saying, I believe, is to be spot on. But I think if you kind of shift the conversation away to which one is better, and I've had this conversation with a handful of my friends before, because we get hung up on these sort of, what's better, paper or plastic? What's better? How do you say tomato? Is it tomato? You know what I mean? But we don't take the time, or we don't go through the exercise of stepping back and go from business perspective, how, rather than saying what's better, digital or paper, couldn't the conversation be pivoted towards like, how do we get as much of our content out to people?
Yep.
Right? Because the thing that people get hung up on is either or. The answer is actually, in my opinion, both, right? If you have a pre-existing customer base that's incredibly loyal, almost tribalistic about the way they get their entertainment from your company, if it's printed, then cool. Then those guys are built in. You know, they can. I don't know how long what the turnover ratio is for people who are like hardcore comic fans. I suspect that it's not, because people have been sticking around for a while. Those guys are the ones that you sort of maintain a great relationship with. What you then do is build on top of that. I don't understand why it needs to be either or for people. You know, if the concept is, how do we get our content to as many people as possible? Right. I think that should be the goal, you know?
It absolutely should be. And that's just it. I think the reason why comics struggle today in the West is there's lots of little factors, but the biggest is there's just not enough places. You don't have,
sure.
And digital is one place, but yeah, it's a multifaceted problem. There's lots of places where comics need to be, but it's not going to grow if it's in this one tiny little segment of the direct market. And I love the direct market,
for sure,
obviously, but it's you got to have it more places. And it's but you know, Michael is asking here, any recommendations on getting your work in front of more people, kind of to what we were just talking about. You know, Michael does a comic weekly, found it's hard to get people to look at. Any tips? What would you say to somebody like that?
Gosh, I'm it's strange to think that I'm genuinely convinced that I'm in the same boat as Michael to scale, right? Like, you know, when I was working on this creator-owned book that I'm soon to crowdfund, I'd reached out to somebody behind the scenes and I said, hey, how do I solve that problem that Michael just proposed, right? And they said something that was like weird to me, but I rarely think about it, which is like, they said, oh, Eric, you got a built-in audience. They're going to come and show up anyway. I'm like, no, I don't. I don't. You guys believe that I do, but I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Right. So how do you cross that threshold of people, you know, being very, very aware of your work? And there are like tons of people like, oh, go on social media, go on this guy's stream, have Perch invite you over to his chat, you know, like there are all sorts of things that people can recommend to you. But that is and this is going to sound really, really basic and cheesy, so please forgive me. In that's 3 steps down the line, right?
Right.
You have to focus on craft, and I can't say this enough, right? There's a really, really, at least, you know, to you guys it might be old, but to me not so old. But like, there's a movie called Field of Dreams, right? And there's a really cheesy saying that says that, you know, if you build it, they will come. And I'm a huge proponent of that saying, not because of, it doesn't encompass everything, but at the end of the day, the work is going to end up speaking for itself. I always refer to a often misquoted Steve Martin quote that says, like, you know, be so good that you are undeniable. Right. Yeah. So if your mission is to get your stuff out in front of as many people as possible, and you think like, I'm running into all sorts of hurdles from, you know, people not paying attention, the body of, you know, like not enough people are talking about it, what have you. I really believe, and I don't know what your body of work looks like, Michael, but I really believe it has to be about the work first, and then slowly but surely people show up.
Yeah. Consistency, right? And just focus on the craft, get it to where you're building up that following. I don't think there's any shortcuts really. I mean, you can get lucky, and some people have, but shortcuts are tough. Yeah.
But the fact that we can say some people have, to me, always registers as those are the exceptions, you know? That's not typical for everything else.
I think I always feel like the people who do get shortcuts and they become this flash of a pan success and it happens for them, it tends to be fleeting. Like it doesn't last long. Many of the people get lucky out quick.
Yeah. If I've learned anything, and I'm just as guilty about this judgment, is that many artists who reach a plateau or a level of success that now are paying attention to them often don't know how to leverage that success because they're not very good businessmen.
Right.
You know, so they'll have opportunities left and right, and this speaks to your like that success is fleeting, right? Because oftentimes you have to do the extra step so that you can become that you can have more longevity, you can prolong that success in whatever manner. I think a great example of this are people like Todd McFarlane, J. Scott Campbell. You know,
Sure.
they are in and of themselves an industry, right? They understood what they had and said, like, actually, I need to do this to scale, right? And
Right.
I don't think it would be, I don't think there's any sort of like long-term sustainability in me always drawing this thing as people have come to understand me, right?
Yeah.
But I know what I'm good at, right? In both of those gentlemen's cases, they knew what they were good at and they went and did it. Now, the contrast are several artists that came out around the same time that they did, got just as much spotlight on them, got just as much attention and accolade, and perhaps even like monetary, like, you know, like they saw money from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I rarely see any of those guys around now, you know?
It's great. And again, people like some good advice here: be relentless, be on time, be professional. You know, you should
Yeah,
hone your craft to be as good as you can be, but it's not
yeah,
about that you become the singularly greatest artist. Be these things.
for sure,
The
for
industry needs.
sure.
Lots of good comments here. Following Eric since the '90s. Never
That's
stopped to read.
kind.
Yeah, your stuff is amazing. So
Thanks, man.
yeah, and thank you very much. People are saying so. As we do every time, please do throw your questions in here, and we'll, definitely for Eric and
Yeah,
answer
yeah.
here.
Anything that you guys want to ask, I'll try to be as transparent as possible.
See if we can get some fun stories out here. This is
Holy cow.
obviously some of your work. I just grabbed. You could tell me about this project you're doing here.
Yeah, sure. A little while ago, a buddy of mine offline had been, so what happened during, this was like around March last year when seemingly the entire world shut down, and I started spending more time sitting behind the desk and doing work from home stuff. And naturally, YouTube was a great extension of just having short clips play. And I started watching a bunch of different channels, and crowdfunding kept popping up all over the place. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And so after digging into it a little bit more, I'd realized I think I have a very fun story to tell, right? And it really comes from a place of, first of all, not reading comic books in forever. I told you this offline. I was like, please forgive me. I haven't read a mainstream comic book consistently in what feels like decades. But also because I'm like, I remember the kind of comics that I'm really super into. I'm understanding that there may be a need, there may be a want for it. And so I'm going to go generate it, right? And also because I'm the kind of guy that gets annoyed at hearing myself complain, you know?
Good for you.
So,
More
so
people
when
really.
so whenever I talk to my friends who also stream on Twitch, who also stream on YouTube, is my buddy Michael DiNicola, and we end up getting into these conversations about movies that don't land very very well because the character was underdeveloped, or plots that don't seem to tie up very nicely. And I could go on for 45 minutes just talking about like, well, that's because of this, and they don't understand the 3-act structure, and they don't understand blah blah blah. Like, I would just talk and I would get off the stream and feel just as empty about it as before I even said anything. So I figured, you know what, I better just shut up and do something about it. even if the end goal, or excuse me, even if the end product doesn't quite live up to what I had planned for it, that's not necessarily the only guiding principle of what I use as a metric of success. A good portion of it, at least top 3, if not top 5, if not top 3, is the fact that I just shut up, and stop talking garbage and just go do something about the thing that I would prefer to improve, and not put the onus on somebody else, but take responsibility for it for myself.
Yeah.
So that's what prompted me doing the book. Now, most things that I had seen out there, and this is another level of challenge that I put in front of myself, is most of the projects that I had seen doing the crowdfunding were these one-offs, and by one-offs, I don't want to diminish it, because doing this is if you've never done it before, if you think it's a sprint, you're dead wrong. It is a marathon. As a matter of fact, it's an ultra marathon, So I don't want to throw shade or diminish anybody out there who's doing the crowdfunding thing, producing their own books, and generating X amount of pages, X amount of pieces of art, writing scripts, because that is no small task. However, what I saw was the concept of, and I spoke about this very briefly. That's a lie. I spoke about this to a much longer extent when I'm streaming, is that what I identified was, if you go into that space, everybody starts talking about, like, what can I offer to a potential backer, right?
Yep.
And I'd realized everybody had generated everything already, short of like the rocket ship that's associated to that person's IP. I'm like, what else can you deliver to a potential backer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, everybody, they've come up with everything from posters to trading cards to, like, I don't know what else, but just everything that you can think of. And I'd realized, okay, I can't. If I were to use that as a thing to do, like to take that formula, it'd just be like what everybody else was doing, and I don't think I could compete. Instead, I focused on the things that weren't being done, that wasn't being leveraged as a premium, as a sort of customer experience, right?
Excellent. Yeah.
At the back end, I decided to focus on the customer experience at the front end. And the one thing I identified is that very, very long waiting time between end of campaign to by the time it gets to the reader's hands. On average, Perch, I think my research led to, and I'm talking conservatively, 8 months.
Yeah.
8 months from end of campaign to in your hands reading it, right? I don't know anybody who can maintain that level of excitement for a comic book for 8 months,
Yeah, no, it's really hard. I think that's one of the problems that crowdfunding has that people don't necessarily talk about, is that time delay is a huge delay from getting people to the delivered product. And I think it's a lot more work. I think people who jump into crowdfunding kind of forget a little bit that there's going to be this massive amount of time you got to deal with. And especially if you're going to do a second project, and it's just, and if you're coming into it for the first time, you don't necessarily know everything you're getting into. So it's not like you can just tee up.
That's another concept.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who get caught up at the front end of crowdfunding, of like generating 10 pages, maybe less, maybe more, so that you can put it up on your crowdfunding page as samples of what people are going to be buying into. On top of the actually campaigning itself and raising awareness for that campaign. And then once that ends, you go like, oh shit, I still got to draw, X amount of pages of this thing, right? So instead, me and the team that's working with me rejiggered the formula and said, don't do it at the back end. Don't draw the pages at the back end. Draw it at the front end.
Yeah.
Draw everything, like up front, and then address how quickly we can get from end of campaign to into readers, backers' hands, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that I didn't see was this thing that I have a really like great belief in. I believe in it wholly, which is consistency.
Yeah.
So whereas people would put out one book every 8 months, again, that's a general number. Okay. I want to do the campaign in which I'm going to do 5 books back to back to back.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I do things differently. I don't deliver to you a premium that is, a holographic, a holographic spaceship. Like, I can't compete with that, man. I would rather have it so that the thing that you're backing in your hand, that user experience of you backing something, and it's sitting in your hand and you're reading, and I'm getting as close to a day of feedback from you.
Yeah.
I think that's how I think that's first of all most important. That's how I establish buyer and reader trust, right? An audience trust. And then secondly, that's how I establish my product to be different than everybody else's.
I got to tell you, because I think the user experience, it is kind of a, I'll see if I can say this in a coherent way. I think that there's a transformation that happens in comics, and it's happening in shops. And the idea of driving to more user experience oriented product is key to the kind of future.
Yeah.
And Jasper Plan 9 writes this, the thing is, you're paying to get a project produced. You're not ordering a book. And that's interesting, because the approach you're taking is you're bringing people into the production.
Yep.
You're bringing people into that experience. And so therefore, I think the expectations are set better of the ride people are on, as opposed to, I'm going to give some money and kind of expect a book, but the book's not going to come for quite a while. I think you're giving people a wholly different experience. You're giving people
right. The point that they're saying is very accurate. I don't think anything that they're saying is wrong. If we use the things that you're talking about as the only version of a particular truth in regards to crowdfunding, I don't believe in that. Like, I don't believe that's the only way to do it, right? And it's not me criticizing, it's me observing, right? Like, if what you're going to do is buy into the project, more power to you. It's your money. You get to do whatever the heck you want. My attitude is, I'm going to reestablish what a success metric is for me, I'm going to establish a success metric for me, not based on what somebody else has done, which doesn't make much sense for the business that I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
So I'll push the book. The book is the thing. The project, the project is the book, not the extras, Yeah,
I think that's awesome. And it's a different product. I think more people will kind of get to
Fingers
that.
crossed. Knock on wood.
I hear that. So I apologize. My audio sounds weird. I don't know. I'm doing the same thing I always do, but maybe there's more echo tonight. So anyway, hopefully it's not bothering anybody. It's raining like crazy outside, so maybe that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, you mentioned that I don't think so. I do this every time. Oh my goodness, Zombie Tramp. Always.
Holy cow!
There we have that. So comics that are coming out next. So these are the comics coming out next week. We've got 3 pages of them, and I ask this question every time I have somebody new on. And it's always, everybody has to like look really close at the screen because the font is small, because there's do you see, and we're going to go through 3 screens of what's coming out next week. Do you think there's just way too much content out there, or like how?
I don't know. Like, I don't know what to use as a point of reference to inform "quote unquote" too much content.
That's true,
right? There's definitely content out there. It's just not getting to people.
Yeah.
And I think that's. It would be amazing if all of these had sort of their fan base. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, I think it's rare that somebody knows that 50% of these books are out. I'm being as conservative as I possibly can.
No, I think right. And it's indicated, like, most of these books, if you'll notice, they're all single digit. I mean, not all. Zombie Tramp 78. So you got to hand it to that, but it's
respect to that.
Yeah, some respect. I like that Action Lab is putting up some strong game against Dynamite for a change.
Right.
But I don't know. I suspect, and I know there's some really good comics in there, but it feels like, at least in North America, it's very hard for people to figure out how to differentiate and how to get people to recognize their product.
I don't have a good answer to how to get, like, okay, let's go back to your original questions. Like, is there too much content out there? If we were just to take a look at what you just, warned me of, which is like, that says 1 of 3, and that's scary as shit to me. That's coming out next week.
Yes.
First, I'm going to hope, and I don't know because I'm not in their offices. I'm going to hope that each of these publishers understand who their readership is, right? Yeah. And they're producing it because they believe somebody is going to end up buying it. Because if they're just producing it for the sake of producing it, that's foolish,
Absolutely.
That doesn't make much sense to me. So is this the appropriate amount of books for the people who are going to be buying it? I don't know. But to me, just if you were to say, gun to my head, 1 out of 3, and I'm looking at, what is that? Easily at 10 publishers there. And I don't know how many books per publisher, but that seems like a lot if you don't know people are going to buy it,
there's just not the kind of the marketing engine, I think, behind this. It feels like a lot of people are expecting somebody else will come in here and kind of help guide people to you're a Zombie Tramp kind of customer and you're a God of War.
Right.
Probably
right.
Joe points out it's very reckless of Betty and Veronica to be going on spring break during these difficult times. Absolutely. That is irresponsible, Archie.
Good luck to both of them. I hope they're both wearing masks.
They've been vaccinated. So
Look at that. Jeez Louise, that's overwhelming.
Yeah. And so here's our second page. And what's striking about this is DC relatively doesn't have too much. I mean, it's.
But you said this is the week.
This is
right.
Week.
Yeah. You multiply this 4 weeks, right? You multiply this, 52 weeks, right? Like it gets just as overwhelming as anything else, I'm going to hope that DC has enough data that tells them, hey, it's worth putting out this many books per month. I don't know. And also there's some books in there that get legacied into its fan base. You know what I mean, Perch? Like
for sure.
There's a reason why there's like 2 or 3 Batman books at any given time,
Yeah. I do like, as people are pointing out, we've got Vampirella and the Joker both the same pose.
Yeah. No, that's the same photographer, I think, just different filters.
Exactly what's going on. No, I mean, to your point, there's typically more than 500 books a month. And,
are you kidding? It's 500?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's
sorry, I'm reeling at the idea of 500 books per month. And none of I understand crowdfunding when it comes to me going in front of you, going in front of a fan base, going in front of potential backers and potential readers, because you see that it's me. I don't know what the publishers are doing to give those hopefuls the same sort of the same sort of experience, right? Like, are they saying, I hope that of the 500 that we publish, 100 of them sell? Is that what our guiding? Is that the big target that we're establishing? Right? Is that our true north? It's like it almost feels like they're throwing things at a wall.
It does, and it's tough because if you go through all these books, you do see a decent amount of genres. They're not all superhero books. There's a lot of, but one of the most common complaints I hear, both in the shop and now on this channel, is where do I find the other books? There's nobody's printing into other kinds of books, but they are. It's just we're not connecting the dots for people.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that, Perch. You are effectively in the position to be able to introduce, where are the other books? You are the person to answer that, right? But you are in a you need to be in a very specific space of not just introducing those books, but also running a business, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you have to, it's a slider for you, like, hey, I want people to read, Super Ghostbusters Cosmic #2, but I don't know how I'm going to be able to sell that, So do you defer to the things that keeps your lights turned on,
Pretty much. I mean, it puts everybody into a very conservative spot. And it's why, and unfortunately, this builds on itself then. It's why the comic industry typically is, there's 50 titles you care about, and there's 450 titles that are become kind of noise. And it's, and then it perpetuates itself. If you're a retailer, you're putting a heavy amount of focus onto the event books, what Marvel and DC are doing, probably a bit of Image. And then it's in the spare 5% of your time, you're looking into the rest of this. Unfortunately, your customer base probably wants stuff in that 5%. They just don't know it. They don't know that stuff is there for them, and you don't have the time.
Fascinating.
So they never find it. You never grow your audience. And it's a very tough problem because I mean, and everybody, I mean, there's so little money in this aspect of it that nobody is taking the time to really kind of point out, if you like Westerns, here are the 3 comics that are going to be Westerns that are coming out. And then, so it's a very tough situation.
I bet.
And it, as you see with this volume, it's relentless. It comes out every week. So nobody ever catches up, and retailers increasingly move to, well, I'm pretty sure King in Black's going to sell because Marvel's promoting it. So I'm just going to order more King in Black and hope it all.
Right. And I think that's you just I think you may have hit into one component that I don't know people, you know, not necessarily smaller publishers, but certainly publishers in general, a component that they don't initiate enough, which is promoting the thing that you really believe in. You
Right.
know, not simply just printing and publishing it and hoping somebody will buy it, but actually convincing people that that's a good thing to invest in, right? You
Yeah.
would think that they would invest more into that concept.
I think it's like everybody just needs to be able to catch their breath. And if everybody
Mm,
did a little bit, if the publishers did a little bit more to kind of market,
mm,
retailers did a little bit more to maybe modernize so they had time, and it just everybody kind of moved the needle a little bit, then everybody could catch up at once. But it's
yeah.
at the moment it's I mean it's a struggling. I know we got at least a couple retailers in the chat. I know Yule's in the chat. He's a retailer. We talked to him a couple weeks ago, and it's tough. This going through
I
the
bet.
it's hard, and you don't have buckets of cash to just
Sure.
over order
Sure.
on things.
Yeah. I mean, that's readily evident after all the shutdowns that happened during the heavier part of the pandemic, right? Like it really was put into clear focus. Like, oh, some of these shops are going month to month, if not, every couple of months. That's
Yeah,
heartbreaking to think about.
absolutely. And we were talking before we went on the air. I went to 4 shops today just for dumb reasons. I mean, it's just what I do.
Yeah.
I had to go to 4 shops to pick some things up, talk to some folks, and for everything from Golden Age Collectibles, which is the largest, and I think they claim, and I think they're true, it's the oldest comic shop in the country.
Mhm.
It's they do a hell of a business, and they're big shops, particularly here on the West Coast, and then a tiny little shop that just opened up in November down in Tukwila. And the thing that shocked
Wow.
the thing that absolutely shocked me about this was how many, like, these huge stacks of indie books that were there. There were so many copies of Crossover on the shelf, and
Mm, mm.
it's super worrying. And the guy I was talking to down in Tukwila is like, yeah, we got really kind of baited in to ordering really huge on these kind of what they were calling celebrity books. People are coming in from the big 2 and then writing.
Is that a thing? Like a celebrity book? Really?
I mean, I don't think it's a real thing, but it is. It's like Al
Oh
Ewing.
my gosh. I hope that doesn't take hold, man.
Yeah,
I really hope that doesn't take hold.
it's tough. I don't know. It's really tough, I think, to be putting this stuff out. But if you're banking on Donny Cates being big at Marvel, he does an indie piece of work, and then you order 150 copies of it. I mean, there were 100 copies of Crossover on the shelf
Yikes.
there, and it's like, that's not going to sell.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, I think what in your experience, Perch, what's sort of the shelf life of something like that? Best guesstimation, like, to say at this point, it's been how long since that book came out, but like, could you pretty much tell by X amount of weeks, if not X amount of days, where you're like, whoa, this is not going to sell?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Can you? Okay.
there's different metrics to use. I mean, for me, I would try and be 80% sold through within a week of
No,
everything.
week. Wow, that is a small window.
Yeah, and that was me. Different shops have different ways, but that was
Sure,
kind
sure.
of over and what I'd try and do. So if I was seeing that 50% of the books were still on the shelf, 4 or 5 days into it, I knew I was in trouble, and the orders needed to be next. And
Wow, man.
other people I think have different models, but we only find them when they're dead. Tons of copies on the shelf. A lot of the death metal stuff was still on the shelf. It was painful to see it.
Yeah.
And you got to move it quick. Yule's in the chat. He's saying the same, that you have to move this stuff really fast. I was surprised. Noctera, there was a lot there, more than I would expect with all the hype that book got. Berserker is gone. I mean, so that's
yeah.
of this month, I think. Anyway,
I think that's the exception that kind of breaks the rule, Berserker, right?
Absolutely.
Like anybody who's not into comics has heard of Berserker somehow. So
it's and to the point, I know there was some controversy over Berserker and the fact that the company used crowdfunding to do it, but getting more of a spotlight on comics, however you get it, is not a bad plan right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the big deal is, because an established company comes in and uses a platform for fundraising
Yeah.
Rather than leaving it to quote unquote, unknowns and literal people. Like the people who are spending money on Berserker aren't taking anything away from you.
No,
At
absolutely.
least it's a weird thing to think about that because they're on this platform, attention, potential income, that doesn't line up with me. That's just like if we're at a convention together and I am sitting behind a table,
Yeah.
right? Just because some guy just because some guy ends up buying a piece of art from that guy or an item off a sketchbook off of that guy doesn't necessarily mean that guy shouldn't be in this room, because if he wasn't, that guy would buy art from me,
Oh, completely.
like that doesn't line up in my head. I think it's just, it's a lot of short term, hey, I need to feel better about why my stuff isn't selling kind of answers.
I agree. I mean, unless if you are peddling a Van Damme comic book where he's immortal and can get shot up, and
Right.
you happen to put that out a week before Berserker comes out, I can understand you getting pissed about that.
Sure. In the rare case that you're talking about, in the test case that you're talking about, I'm on board. But any other time, I'm like,
none of these other.
You're barking up the wrong tree. I saw that happen with the big one that they complained about was like Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And I'm like, yeah, the reason why it sells well is because Power Rangers is a well-known brand. Whether or not they should or should not have used crowdfunding, it's almost like why do you want to keep them out of there? Because
Sure.
for the reason where it should be left to the little guys. I don't know.
It is. No, it's a shame. And I think what people need to realize is the algorithm for this stuff. If you're getting a lot of attention to a comic book project on Kickstarter, all the other comic book projects will have related links. It's going to help everybody to get more.
For sure. But the key thing is that it's not guaranteed. You still have to go sell your product. You still have to make sure that there's an audience for it. You still have to make sure that it's compelling enough so that people will either pay attention. And in those spaces, what's critical is the individual themselves who's trying to sell the product, right? Like,
absolutely.
I can't imagine a situation that a creator, an artist, a writer, a creative team comes off as adversarial and abrasive to their public and then expect anybody to come and back them up. That doesn't make any sense to me. So, look internal, before you start pointing at people.
Absolutely. These comics need more promotion, and
they do.
Be smart. Actually, in your next crowdfunding campaign, put in tags that are going to link you into to other successful campaigns. I mean, cheat
for sure.
Nothing wrong with it. I put up
cows. Look at all those comics, dude.
Yeah, 3 of 3.
Louise.
So look at what Marvel is so many in 1 week, and these two, Children of the Atom, Nonstop Spider-Man. It's the year anniversary from when these comics were announced and originally supposed to come out.
And they're just coming out now.
They're just coming out, so a 1 year delay, but here they are.
Is that the pandemic coming in and rearing its ugly head, or?
It was the pandemic, and then I think Children of the Atom got delayed enough that then it had to be redone, is what I've heard. It no longer fit with the X universe. But I mean, I don't know. The X books they're still just partying on Krakoa, so I don't know why they needed to. Anyway, and I Nonstop Spider-Man, I know there were some issues with Chris Bachalo and getting some work done, and I think he had some personal things going on that delayed it. But anyway, very long. But it's still a ton of comics. Just
it is. It is. From a buyer's perspective, from a retailer's perspective, I don't know how that's a viable concept. I just, how much are comics now, Perch? Sorry.
We're probably averaging about $375, kind of in that range. More stuff has migrated to $499, so we're in that $399, $499 range, and it's a lot.
And that's become okay.
Well, no, I mean the numbers are down. It's not okay. I think it's where the industry has gone, but no, I don't think it's okay at all. There's not an easy entry point, so. That's part of the problem. I think perhaps where things go is some of these all-you-can-eat these services, DC Infinite and Marvel Unlimited and that kind of stuff. People get comfortable with the idea that they're reading comics in delay, and that's just how new people can come in. But it's just very expensive. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm like I'm way too old to use my personal experience as a good point of reference, you know. But when I hear $5 for a comic, I'm like,
Yeah.
especially from I don't know the business of printing anymore. I used to have an understanding of like why certain things scale the way they do in regards to the cover price versus everything that went on behind the scenes to get that thing produced, from artists to obviously like, the cost of business and overhead, right?
Uh-huh.
But I don't know what's informing $4.99 anymore. So
Well,
I guess that's why I asked. I'm like, is that good? Like, is that?
it's tough, but at the same time, the creators are not walking home with like millions of dollars either. It's not. It's not like the money is going to at least I feel better about it if that was the price, and then we were hearing that artists' page rates had doubled and the industry creators were making more. That would be at least something, but that's not happening either. So I don't know. It's tough.
And comics have gotten really complex in as far as the visual experience is concerned.
Sure.
Like I'd flip through books and I'm like, on my best day, if I had slept and eaten a proper breakfast, I couldn't draw half of this stuff. It's so dense,
There's a lot.
Like, yeah. There's a lot of detail on each and every single page. And I'm like, these guys all need to calm down, man.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to shift it into third gear because everybody's in fifth all the time.
Well, it's true. I've gone back and I've looked at runs. Joe and I did the City of Crime retrospective earlier, which is older. That's a very beautiful looking book. But further back, you go back to some of the 80s Avengers and Under Siege and some of these storylines, and it's a great story. But what you'll notice is the art is not as dense as you might remember. I mean, people knock the current artists, but a lot of that stuff was fairly simplistic. Great. It looked great. I mean, the creators they knew how to use the space, but it wasn't like it wasn't the same kind of density I think we get today. I'm not making my point very well, but
well, by the way, it's not that I'm knocking it. I think things mature, right? Things grow into sort of what's to be expected in the spaces that used to be a whole lot. So I'm a huge Walt Simonson fan from his Thor days, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I would look at those. I'd revisit those comics from time to time, and you omit the color, and he really had an economy of line. He knew exactly where to pay attention to +1, +10 everything. But for the most part, he's got to get through this book. As we've matured into what comics look like now, I'm a fan of it, right? I'm like, man, all these guys can freaking draw and they can all draw well. But as a business, I'm wondering if that is hindering, it's hindering them sort of, first of all, like, are they coming in on time, right? Are these books getting delayed as much as they are because everybody expects the seams in the pants to show up all the time? Like, whose cover is that? Is that Dave Finch's on that Nonstop Spider-Man, for crying out loud?
Yes, I think so. Let's see. Yeah. I think that's David Finch.
It's got his render, but I'm not sure.
I'm almost positive that is. Yeah, but this is another book where I think there's no less than like 20 variant covers of this book. So that's a whole.
Let me ask, from your perspective, right? As a fan and as a retailer, is that as close to the term that I keep hearing pop up is predatory? Is it predatory, or where do you stand on it?
For variant covers, no, I don't. I'm not a fan of them. I don't know that it's predatory because you are opting in. I mean, the rub is always that you have some customers, and typically, speaking, the customer that is going to spend a lot of money at your store, the whale, the person who's going to drop $200, $300 a month or more. Those are the people who are going to want the $50 special, 1 in 1,000 variant cover, and so you don't lose that customer. You don't want that customer to go somewhere else because then you're worried that customer is going to start just moving all of their business to somebody else. So you wind up buying a lot of comics you won't sell in order to get the variant cover to satisfy this one customer.
Sure.
And that's generating a lot of pulp in your store. You're not books. So that part is not healthy. It's just not. It's not healthy for the business to have all these comics that kind of everybody knows aren't going to sell, but are there to prop up variant covers.
Right.
I think it's bad.
And
for
to your,
everybody.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, dude.
Oh no. Just go, please.
I was going to say, like, and to your point, in some of the numbers the sales analysis that you've done, you almost always leave out the first issue.
Right.
not just because it's the first issue and it's going to go through the roof, but also you've mentioned this a handful of times where you say, like, there's 20 covers for that thing. This number is completely skewed,
It is.
So it's not unheard of, or it's not strange to see that dramatic drop from issue 1 to issue 2.
And I think that part, it teaches the industry an unhealthy lesson. It tells comic shops, hey, always reduce your orders by half for the second issue. And you've seen some runs where the second issue drops and then it drops under the demand. And so then they're trying to scramble their way back up. And it just, by that point, you've lost some people who might have normally stuck with the title. It's just, I think it teaches everybody the wrong lessons. It causes people to buy things they know they aren't going to sell to satisfy this other requirement. And all in all, it's just not healthy. That's my issue with it. And there's different things. There's where the store can kind of opt in to get a specialized cover for them. I think that's way different. That's sure. Much cleaner. Sure. I don't think variant covers are bad. I think you do a couple, but when you do start to look at things and it's like, this is the one that caught me was, and Dynamite does this. They'll do their variant covers and they'll say, this is cover A, B, C, D. And then you're looking at the list. There's like, here comes cover Z. And then I started noticing here comes cover AL, and you're like, "Oh my God, we've looped the alphabet, and we're continuing."
Right, we're doing states now. Here's cover California, here's cover Oregon,
and it's just like, you have done too many. You've got to stop. This isn't going to be helpful for anyone.
I don't know the business. Again, forgive me. I don't know the business of it from a publisher's end. Why that makes sense for them to do that many covers? I can't imagine. That's the reason why when somebody uses the term predatory, I go like, as a practice, that seems to line up, because of what it's ultimately trying to say to not just to the fans, not just to the readers, but what it's trying to do with, and I use this term as fairly as I can, to their partners, in as far as the retailers are concerned, right? You are an extension of their publishing practices, and you would hope that you, as a publisher, you would try to understand the limitations of any given retailer, your business partner.
Right.
It doesn't seem like they're taking that into account.
It has to be. I think if you're a publisher, your goal has to be to get your comics into the hands of end customers. But this is a classic B2B2C kind of business, and the problem is, I think a lot of publishers see it as a pure B2B business. So they see the end of their game being the retailer. They don't.
I wanted to ask you about that. That's it kind of sparked my memory, which is, do you believe, at least, again, this is all stemming from your knowledge and experience as both a retailer observer and as a fan of comics. Do you believe there had been a shift into this, the sort of the space that you're talking about now when they took returnability off the table?
Yeah, I mean, I get why. I mean, it was crushing people, the publishers, I understand, and it was a better business model. I mean, at the beginning, it worked out for everybody, that it's like, we're going to take returnability off the table, but you, the direct market, will get more money. And that's people kind of forget about that piece. The direct market got a bigger cut. So it wasn't like it was just one direction. Direct market loved this idea for quite a while.
It was well accepted then. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were totally happy with it, and but as time has gone by, that has hurt people more and more. And I think it kind of comes to, when you're getting a title off the ground, it would be really helpful if the first 6 issues were returnable, for example, to kind of really push retailers to do this. Smaller publishers are doing this now as a way to kind of say, they don't want to. This is how we stand out from Marvel, DC, and Image. This is how we rise in the visibility for the catalog. But it's a tough situation. So
yeah. Okay, that's interesting, because I'm really trying to wrap my brain around where that disconnect started happening. When the businesses sort of started, to your point, which is like, publishers think of it as more of a to B, right? Whereas you would hope that in as far as it's what would you call it, in the makeup of what makes things work, you would consider B2C as well, right? As a publisher, you
have to. And this is, I mean, lots of businesses do B2B2C, and it's easy to forget. I think I'm really bothering. Hey, Peter, glad you're here. I'm definitely not an AI, but I typically I'll do the face reveal, and then everybody will be happy, and it'll be great. But anyway, it is it. It's really bugging the guy. I am glad you're all here. It's very easy to start to forget about that customer because your money is coming from the shop. So I get it,
Right?
totally get it. But that's kind of a short-term way of thinking because selling through to that customer matters. That's if it doesn't, then you're hosed. I mean, that's the it won't get you today, but it'll get you eventually. So
eventually, and very quickly. Especially the way things get out. Especially the way things get communicated out now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to be able to think about that piece, but it is the more you abstract yourself from that end customer, the worse. And I do think over the years there's been closer and further away relationships. Right now, I think the relationship's actually pretty far between the publishers and a lot of the retailers.
Is it really? Huh? That's heartbreaking. Now it would be so much more critical that you bridge that gap, because things have been, at least from my limited vantage point, things have been contracting in a pretty steady rate. No?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. It's, I mean, the money is centralizing. There's certainly healthy parts of the industry and comics. I think there's parts of it that are very, very healthy, but a lot of what we're used to, I think, isn't. And Jeff Thorne, who's a writer for Green Lantern, he was in the chat a little bit ago. He made a point quite a while ago that was truly, I think, really, really smart. And it was that the direct market was built up with a certain audience selling a certain way and to a certain customer base. Now here we are, and we're saying we really want to have comics sold to more people. We want to grow that audience, but your only sales channel is that same old sales channel. So
great point. Great point.
Yeah. It's unless you change that sales channel, you're going to have the same people, and it's
I mean, you can have the best product out there. You can have, really, amazing experiences with that read or with that author or with that artist. But if it's the same delivery system, you're going to run into exactly what you've been running into the past decade, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's a rough situation, and I think you take a look, and I'm watching this kind of thing spin around with just different books like Naomi, which came out, and there's this consternation about why do the fans hate this so much? It's like, well, you made a book for a very different segment, and then you largely sold it into the same place as your traditional comic fans. And then you wonder why the traditional comic fans don't like the new thing you're doing. It's like,
right.
I mean, you could see this coming. Everybody could see this result.
I wonder what it is. You and I were commenting, or at least I was commenting on one of your videos in regards to this young adult novel thing, that these initiatives for young adult novels, right? And we were talking about, the spirit of what you're talking about is like, you can predict that this won't do well. And a lot of people have a tendency to sort of only look at one column. And this is the point that I made in the comment, was people have a tendency to look at the column of like, this probably won't sell well, Yeah. To which I propose, and I'm not 100% convinced that this is accurate, but it feels like it could be, which is to say, like, if we were to use that metric as the end all be all why a book should be made, I think that's pretty transparent. That's pretty clear. It's pretty evident, right? There's data backing that up month in. At the end of the month, you take a look at how many units sold, and you're like, whoa, this didn't sell very well. But from a different perspective, and if you focus on another column, and I think you said it just recently, where you're like, is the victory here just because this book got printed? And I go, well, it could be, but that's not a good business model. No, that's not sustainable.
It's a matter of opinion, but I've struggled with that one because there's definitely been some people in the chat and commenting on the videos that say, hey, just getting the book published is good. It gets it out there, and that's a victory, like you said. But I think you want it to sell, so you get another.
Yeah.
They're not just going to be publishing this stuff.
I think so, but I don't want to impose onto publishers what my personal values on what makes for a successful publishing venture. What I do kind of refer to, and you tell me if this sounds off to you, is that depending, and we talked about this offline, which is like I always point at leadership, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then ultimately like the stewardship of the thing that you are trying to print or the thing that you're trying to produce, right? And the example that I've given my friends before is that Apple understands that it's a computer company,
Right.
right? That deals in these other things from like entertainment to what have you, right? And it has an understanding that it has an ancillary stake in those areas, right? But at
Hmm.
the end of the day, they're a computer company. However, right, if somebody were to say, well, Apple, heads of state, right, like leadership, we can start making microwaves, you know, because inside a microwave technically is a computer, right? It's like what turns the microwave on.
This is a good
And
point.
Apple goes, yes, yes, but that's still not what we make, you know?
Right.
Right? We don't do that, right? And I think that's what's happening in a way, and that's a really, really clumsy analogy. But I think it's like a really like the stewardship and the leadership need to understand their product. And I don't think they have a like a lighthouse that helps them guide their decision making. It's
Yeah.
just coming from it feels like, and this is not corroborated by any sort of personal experience. Like I said, I've been out of comics for a while, but when I take a look at the product that's on the stands, I often look at that doesn't speak to your guys's brand at all until somebody tells me, well, maybe that's not their brand anymore, right? And I go like, oh, well then this should not be like, then you should not be. Then yes, maybe this is a surprising failure in publishing or in product. But if you should not be surprised if you understood your brand, you made microwaves, and you're a computer company,
No, for sure. I mean, it's curious. I mean, people are saying in the chat, DC, they're trying their YA strategy. I think I had the comment up from Jeff a minute ago. Primer is an original character. It's superhero. It's all ages. It appeals, and if you look at the Amazon charts, it's doing very well, and it's not
Mhm.
surprising. It's
Mhm.
it's hitting all the right boxes there to meet its audience. I think you take an existing property, you take whether it's the newest one with Nubia, or you have the Starfire one coming out. It's a
Mhm.
much harder game because you're fighting too many different things. You're trying to
Sure.
penetrate the market. You've
Sure.
got your old market that's like, hey, I know who this character is, but that's not the character I know. So then you're having that argument, and it becomes friction at that point. And friction slows down sales. You want to avoid friction whenever you can.
Yeah. Can I ask you though, what is the advantage of leveraging a pre-existing concept like that has a built-in expectation,
Yeah.
right? And then turning it into something that it's not.
Oh, I don't think it's a good plan at all. I think it's
Okay. I thought there was something to it, like you take brand identity and you go like, hey, this has enough people attached to it, or like I have to admit that I can't see the angle, and I'm with you. But I'm like, maybe Perch knows something where it's like, well, here's something that you didn't think of.
no. I mean, I've heard the argument. I've heard the argument from people at Marvel. I am assuming it's similar at DC, which is the brand is the brand. The comic is the output of the brand. So everybody
Mhm.
knows Batman the brand, but not everybody knows Batman the comic. To me now, but that's where I think there's a flaw in logic, and it makes you. I'm going to have to take another drink here just to kind of process that. But that is
Yeah.
what I've heard. And so the idea is like, if everybody knows Batman, then you should be able to do an adult Batman. You should be able to do a YA Batman. You should be able to do,
I've heard
all
that.
types
I've
of.
heard that.
And then you're just the singularity in there is Batman, is the logo, is that. The problem is it doesn't. I don't think that works out in reality. The customers are savvy enough to go, that Batman is fundamentally different from this Batman. And even though I'm a different
Mm.
audience, I'm not, I can only stretch that brand too far. That's
Mm.
the challenge. I think that I'm not describing that terribly well, but it's like, you can have a lighter Batman adventure and you can have a super dark and serious city of crime type Batman adventure, and it's fine.
You can have like Lego Batman, right? You can have like the Batman movie Lego, right?
Yeah.
So
But eventually it stretches and stretches. And when you start fundamentally altering the character, then you're not getting the benefit off the brand. And if anything, you're more likely going to irritate people coming in with some expectations about what they're about to receive. And then
yeah.
completely wrecking those expectations.
Well, then there you go. Then that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, or at least the point that I was trying to make, which is somebody on the stewardship end needs to identify that, right? Like, there's a reason why Batman works using Batman as an example from everything that you've covered so far to like the example that I came up with, which I've had extended conversation with my leadership to be like, we need to understand what the brand is. We need to understand sort of like the pillars of the character, right? Pillars of like the concept, if it's not a character, like a holistic understanding of like, here's what the foundational things that we have to have so that it doesn't turn into somebody else. But it allows us to make Dark Knight, but it also allows us to do the Batman Lego movie, right?
Yeah.
But somebody at the, but I don't know why that works, right? Why that holds up in whatever entertainment metric that they put in front of it. But something like this, like Starfire, like Nubia, why that doesn't work,
Well, and I think it doesn't work for kind of different reasons. I think, with Batman and Lego Batman, I think Lego is a toy, and you have the toy based on Batman. Lego is a very defined thing. So to a customer, you can say, I know what Lego is. I know what Batman is. This is kind of merging the two. It's not creating a new thing with Batman's logo on it. It's like, okay, I kind of get that.
Right.
Lego has done the Star Wars and Harry Potter and all that kind of stuff. So you know that what they're after. When you go to something like Starfire, you're still producing a graphic novel. It's still kind of work, but yet the characters are wholly different from what you're used to over here. So now it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just you're creating a ton of confusion, and so you have to ask yourself: is the confusion worth it? What if I just did what Primer did and just make an original character? Would that be an easier road? And and of course they also underfund these efforts as well. They're timid about going into it, so they tend to be more reserved about the amount of money they're spending. The customers sense that, and it becomes a domino effect.
That is fascinating, man. I never thought about the angle of like, well, you're doing it almost one-to-one, but not paying attention to the source material, because now it's like saying I'm going to go, oh gosh, I'm going to make the same exact thing but different, right?
Yeah.
That's a weird concept to me.
It's very strange. And in fairness, DC has done the superhero girl stuff. They've done other things, but they've tried to take existing properties and just make it more cartoonish, make it younger, but they're not stretching it to try and create a whole new character, but use the same brand. I don't know. There's not a clean line, but it's a lot of money getting wasted. It feels like, you gotta know your audience. That's the key.
Yeah. I'd be genuinely interested in what that pitch meeting looked like when they're moving into these spaces. Hey, we want to identify where the customers are, right? And we believe that they can be over here. Now, what do they do over there that allows those things to be successful, those products to be successful? And then they pitch it, and then they go like, yeah, but we're going to turn it on its ear and not be the thing that people expect.
Right.
That doesn't make much sense to me.
No, not at all. It's I don't know, the idea of subverting expectations as a concept, I think, went from, hey, we're going to introduce a cool different twist you won't see coming, to hey, we're just going to do whatever we want, and it's we're really clever. We subverted your expectations, as opposed to
I'm telling you, like I have never appreciated the editorial staff of like old school Marvel more than I do these days whenever I'm tempted or I'm brave enough to buy a comic book. Like I have such a huge appreciation for the guys who are making sure that things go well behind the scenes back in the day, because without it seems a lot clunkier.
Oh, for sure. It's I don't know, it's a strange model, and it is more complicated. It's not like, I wish at least people I've known who've worked in the big two and people I talk to, you kind of hope that the solution is that just everybody is insane, and you go in there and they're all terrible and stupid, and that's why. But they're not.
Right.
In a lot of cases, they're trying to make good decisions. They're doing it with data. It's just it's like a very fundamental piece of understanding is missed at the beginning, and then everything unravels from there.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes in those, and I've been in a handful of meetings before, not of that, but of something similar, where the group gets excited about it is because it seems like it's a very viable option, a very viable target to go after. And in some way, somehow, leadership steps in. Guys, we really appreciate all of this enthusiasm. We really appreciate the potential that this could present, or the potential that this presents, and then ultimately the sort of things that could come out of it.
Right.
And then they go back and go, but here are the pillars of who we are as a collective and as a company.
Exactly.
Does any of that align to anything that we stand for? And it's not to say it's going to be this hard and fast rule by which things bounce off of it if it doesn't fit through those filters. But at the very least, it gets brought up. Here's who we are. Is this a project worth pursuing, regardless of how exciting it is, regardless of how seemingly viable it is as an exercise? There's potential money there, but is that who we identify as a publisher or as a company?
I think if I'm predicting in the years to come, I do believe that we're going to see this very strange kind of centralization, and we're going to move to some of this. So Jeff's mentioning here, where's my GCPD series of novels? I think it's going to still take a little while, but I do think you're going to see a much more aligned business for everybody, and that'll be good and bad. It'll be good in that some things will make more sense. It'll be bad in that maybe it'll be a little less truly quote unquote creative because you got to adhere to a model, and it'll be interesting. Let me move on to this here real quick. Some people are mentioning WandaVision. Are you watching? We won't do spoilers, but are you watching this show by any chance?
I am. My wife and I, like this morning, I had just mentioned to her because I get up pretty early in the morning, and I was just about to I know it's the season ender or whatever you call it, and I was so tempted to just watch it independent of her, and I knew the heat that I was going to catch if in our Disney Plus account, you can tell when somebody's watched an episode, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like if that episode bar had been all the way to the end, I was going to catch hell. I was like, I better stop this right now. But no, it is to say that I do watch it. I've been watching it. Yeah.
So your situation, I have the same, but a little bit sadder. So my younger daughter, who's 7, loves this show.
Oh, right on.
And she would give me the same.
Charming Perch.
She would know. She would see the little bar there, and she would be.
That's pretty cool, man. That is really cool.
I wanted to talk to you in particular. You're an amazing illustrator. You've worked in these different spaces. How do you look at how these comics are translated to movies? How does that kind of? What's that? Do you have any thoughts on that process? I mean, a lot of people are talking about it now. You see kind of how they're adapting Wanda's costume in these different moments. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. There's 2 versions of me. One is like the person who read these comics from back in the day, right? Which is to say like, hey, that's kind of a nice homage and the wink and a nod and yada, 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 right? But that's like X amount of decades removed, right? But the other part of me, the other version of my brain that I shift into is like, I've never seen this before. What I know about Wanda, what I know about Vision is what was, shoved down my throat in the, in the most recent Marvel movies, right?
Yep.
So is this interesting enough to have any sort of legs for X amount of episodes, And the answer is it's my opinion, it's been pretty successful, it's hard to write, week to week television anymore,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think we're in a world where the week-to-week television and this kind of model is going to have to be their future. So it's a complex world they're having to deal with.
Yeah. Does that answer your question? Is that what you were asking about? Like,
I'm just also wondering, just stylistically, when you're illustrating things, and do you ever think about how it could be translated, or does that go into your process about?
Oh yeah. I just got through talking about that the other night. That when I was working with Mark, everybody says Miller. Is it Miller or Millar? I've been calling him Mark Millar. Anyway,
it's funny. So I'm scheduling the interview with him as soon as he's freed up from his current commitment. So hopefully within the next few weeks, and I will ask him, because I have seen interviews where they call him Mark Miller. I've seen them call him Mark Millar, and he's standing there just smiling for both.
He never corrects them. He never corrects. I've never heard him say, actually, here's the point of truth, Anyway, so when I was
actually, so This is the mystery of our times. We have to solve this.
I think it's kind of nice that he just kind of stands there and smiles. Like
Yeah.
it's the one thing that people haven't quite figured out, and I think that's it's nice to have that in the background somehow.
Yeah.
And working with him on Chrononauts, right?
Yeah.
I knew what his situation was with Netflix, and so I presented Chrononauts in the most storyboardish version I could draw a page, right, in the panels on the page, because I knew and so to me that was as close to me sort of like visualizing what the scenes would look like on screen. You know what I mean? So so to answer your question, I'm like, yeah, there are plenty of times when I take a look at something, I'm like, oh, that translated well. Well, that probably will never translate well. Or, hey, that's as good as that gets, because the panel is, you put so much of yourself into that panel, as opposed to a movie or a television show in which you're more sort of you're in a passive state. You're in a passive state of mind. You're being fed information, as opposed to like the panels that you're looking at right now. Like I take a look at how that hair is like sneaking under the what do you call it, right? It's sneaking under the headdress. And I go like, oh, that's a personal choice from whose drawings is that? Is that John Byrne?
Yeah, that's Byrne. Yeah, from West Coast Pictures.
Yep. So you're like, oh yeah, so that's that's a stylistic choice that he made, but if we were to use that in the photograph, the screenshot that you took of Wanda, you'd be like, that doesn't make that looks messy. Like that doesn't.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Some things don't translate well. I mean, and I think it is always tough. You see comic fans like really irritated that some aspect of what they've always loved is not what they put in the movie. But if they did it, it would look super weird. And I think
it's one of the main reasons why they opted for like all black X-Men costumes, because the basically, like, I think it was Bryan Singer that says you just can't imagine those characters wearing the kind of outfits that they wore in the comics, and then he goes and puts Superman in with the underwear on the outside of his pants. So like I'm confused by his decision making. Is what I'm getting at. You're like, I can't deal with X-Men looking the way they do in comics, but Superman, absolutely. A belt, underwear on the outside of the pants, totally cool.
Oh yeah, no, it's a funny line people go to, and it feels like that's one of those areas where nobody's ever going to be fully happy with the choice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, again, it's a lot of the things that you project into the comics, right? Your own personal attitudes of how things are designed, how stories are told, which is a lot more active than when you're watching a movie. You take a passive role in that experience, and you're being told things look like this, and now it goes under the scrutiny of what the picture is in your head versus this thing that's being sort of delivered to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Everybody wants to. Well, I keep getting recommends to talk about the Lola basketball thing, but I mean, come on. I mean, they changed Lola. Space Jam 2, and I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the controversy there.
I have no idea what I saw photos of it, and I go like, isn't that just par for the course of what's happening in this day and age? Sure. I don't know. I'm not aligned to a lot of the sensitivities that we're putting these filters through. I think if I'm being quite honest, if I'm being honest, but probably not predicated on any sort of data. I think a lot of it is just changing for the sake of changing. It's not really based on anything they have an understanding for. It really is to say like, hey, look how forward thinking we are, And it's like, yeah, nothing was broken though,
It's funny. It's all tongue in cheek. I mean, to me, it's like by the time this is like the 80th time this has happened this month. So like, I don't know. It's hard for me to get really anxious about it. But,
yeah.
The funny part to me was the picture that was going around. And I don't think a lot of people realize that they were showing this side-by-side comparison, but the picture of quote unquote the original Lola was not original. It was from fan art of like 6 months ago. And
was it really?
Oh yeah.
There you go.
I mean, they did change in her style, but the picture that was often shared with like some nice light coming in from the background and everything. I'm looking at this going, the movies didn't look like this 20 years ago.
Sure.
But
yeah, it's like Yeah, and I think you would agree with this, Perch. Like, there's only so much social media I
Oh, yeah.
can take. Like there's only so much social media that's consumable before you go. And I don't know what your cutoff is, but me, if I have to scroll or like thumb swipe up more than 2 times, and
Yeah.
the conversation is still going, and then I have a moment of clarity, and I go like, "This is a cartoon bunny, right?" Like, I'm moving on, right? Like, better things to do with my day.
It's less and less. I will get back, but Twitter seemed to have gotten dumber lately. So I spend less time. Well, I do this every week, and it's just these are to kind of stuff. These are comics that came out this week in previous years. So this time,
Holy cow. That is
and
awesome.
there's a lot. Like there's a ton of stuff out here. This was, of course, the amalgam week where we got
Mm-hmm.
DC versus
Mm-hmm.
Marvel, something we are never going to get again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just not going to happen. But that web of Spider-Man there, the Wolverine's about to straight up
That's
power
great.
back. I mean, yeah,
That's great. That's a Sienkiewicz cover on that Uncanny X-Men, right?
yes, I think it is.
Right. I
Not
can't
sure.
tell based on that. I think it's that signature, but I'm not sure. So I had to buy that out of a I was trying to complete my X-Men collection, and I had to buy that one. I can't remember what I paid for it, but for a kid my age trying to buy that back issue, that was a hefty sum for
Oh yeah.
me. Secret Wars 2, I got Secret Wars 1 I traded a kid a couple of basketball cards
Oh nice.
uh, for a copy of Secret Wars, and I can't remember the original one, right? I can't remember back when I was still living in the Philippines, and
Mhm.
having that, like, oh my gosh, every superhero that I've ever seen in my cousin's comic book collection is in this book. This is awesome. So in Secret Wars 2, when I had heard of Secret Wars 2, I'm like, it's more of the same, right? And I buy it, and I'm like, oh, this isn't the same thing.
Yeah.
When are they going to fight?
Yeah, no, Secret Wars 2 is such a letdown. Like, I mean, we're immediately getting into kind of some. They're hanging out in the apartment. I remember being
Right.
a kid reading this, like, what the hell is this? Like,
Yeah.
this is a terrible sequel at this point.
Right. Versus what do you call it? The DC Marvel stuff, the amalgam stuff. I know I was around for it when it was coming out, but I don't know if I invested in it all that much.
It's aged well, I think. I mean, it's cheesy for
Has
what
it
it,
really?
but it's aged pretty well. I think they've
Okay.
done so many different versions of this kind of concept that you have new respect. You go back and read this, like that Amazon there is John Byrne doing Storm, Wonder Woman, and I think that's a John
Sure.
Byrne Web of Spider-Man underneath it as well. But
Really? Is it really?
he was doing web for a while. Like the several covers were Byrne's
Yeah.
back in the original ones, and
I'm just trying, like, I track the artist by how they do Spider-Man's eyes, Like, and I'm looking at that going like, I don't remember. First of all, I don't have a good point of reference of Byrne doing Spider-Man, but who was he trying to do back in the day? He may have been trying to do like a Romita Spider-Man.
Mhm.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
it's a good time. I mean, Cloak and Dagger. Somebody's saying in the chat there. I mean, this also seems like they've never. That's a good group of characters that just Marvel's never really seemed to know what to do with.
Cloak and Dagger. Yeah.
There's some nice, very nice stuff there. But yeah, this was a lot of good stuff back then. There's the very first issue of G.I. Joe came out this
Yeah.
week, many years ago.
Yeah.
We got that cool
This
kind
is a great time machine you've got us on, Perch.
of. This is the favorite part. It's definitely. I mean, I don't know. There's some amazing comics in here for sure.
Geez, look at the limited color palettes that they had on all of those covers.
Yeah.
Especially like look at Moon Knight. Moon Knight is like 3 or 4 colors tops, and it still has that light that's peeking through between the building. That's bonkers good. And that's not digital. Somebody was laying down the color tone for that.
Oh yeah. All of these. I mean, that's a great point, but people forget. None of this was digital work.
Yeah.
I mean, everything you're seeing on this screen was done in an original way.
Yeah.
I mean, that Thor book, and with a very limited color palette. I'm curious as an artist. So you learned and you drew, like when you started, you were using pen and paper. You were using traditional methods. Do you think that it's helped you, right, to learn some of those original techniques as
Mhm.
opposed to just starting with digital. A lot of artists today I'm meeting have never gone to paper. They just always began with digital. Do you think you lose something in that process?
Between digital and traditional, right? So like the actual exercise of doing either or, um, there's a tact, and this is not necessarily, this doesn't show up in the end product, but the
Mhm.
tactile nature of drawing on traditional, I don't think there's anything that can replace that, right? Like seeing that ink come out of the pen and me penciling something, and because I'm super heavy handed, I just gouge the paper.
Right.
That's pretty amazing, right? And to actually have an original piece, of art that I drew sitting in front of me, that's a lot of fun, right? But if we're going to talk about the process in by which we make comics from zero to
Mhm.
zero, you hear that screaming in the background? That's my kid.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Okay, forgive
I've got
me.
rings in my background, so, and no cats. There's no cat in my house. I don't know where that may be you. I don't know.
Yeah, but what do you call it? If you were talking about generating comic and trying to stay on schedule, I don't really like, do whatever you need to do to stay on deadline, man.
Mm.
If
Okay.
there's a way that you can somehow convince people that like, not convince people, but if you're happy with the art that you're producing digitally, as in as much as like if you need to shift your expectations that you're happy doing digital art and you're meeting your deadlines, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the production has to happen. What do you do? I mean, I know the answer to this, but if you're a digital artist and you're putting this together, this basically is cutting off your ability to sell that art. Well, how do you make that up?
Yeah, well, we're getting into a space now, and I don't know how viable it will be long term, but we're getting into a space now where people are, um, turning these pieces of art, and tokenizing them and selling them as NFTs. And I'm not certain every page will be like, if you're drawing a 22-page book and it's all digital, can you sell them on the digital market? I don't know. Nobody's ever tried it before, but I know a handful of people, including myself, are giving it a good run. It used to be impossible. There wouldn't be a market for a digital piece of art, but nowadays it's opening up and it's exciting.
You want to make sure that there's some kind of longer term. Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to potentially do this, but it is going to take another shift in the industry. Unfortunately, it's an industry that as we were talking about with digital earlier, or just digital reading of comics. It's not,
Sure.
we haven't adapted well in the West, so now we also have to adapt to how you get, how do we get artists money in
Yeah,
this?
for sure.
It's there's a lot of
I'm a
things.
huge proponent of that, man. Like you know, I was having a conversation with somebody in regards to, you know, the artist's contribution to a long-term design that has a profound impact in the company's overall bottom line of being able to earn. The perfect example that I was thinking of was, Miles Morales as a Spider-Man, right? Um,
Yeah.
and the expectation has been historically to just be like, well, you created for us, we gave you a page rate, and that's what you earn. Like regardless of, you created Spider-Man, Mark Morales, Doctor Doom, right? You gave that to us. That's what we're, that's part of our expectancy of you as a comic book artist. I think that needs to change.
Oh, I completely agree.
And I think it has been slowly changing. It just hasn't been in people's faces, like,
Mhm.
um, I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but I know more than a handful of my friends, comics artists, who have been asked to design characters that end up on books,
Yeah.
um, independent of their page rate,
Yeah.
because
No,
it makes sense,
it
like,
absolutely it does. Um, Before we go to the next set of comics, I did want to draw some people in chat mentioned this GI Joe cover is fairly iconic. I mean, this was,
yeah,
I remember this image was printed everywhere,
yeah,
way beyond the comic, and it's one of those cases where you had the toy line, you had the cartoon, you had all these pieces. I think people forget that GI Joe was a good. There's a lot of new comic readers who came into comics from GI Joe, and it was a
yes,
really good job of bringing them in. We don't have as much like that today. People are not coming into comics through the movies like they did with G.I. Joe.
Is it because the barrier to entry is that much harder to, like, G.I. Joe had the benefit of a newsstand, right?
Yep.
They had the benefit of a local 7-Eleven, right? You can't access new G.I. Joe comics as easily as you used to.
It's true. You couldn't easily pick it up. Now, if you see something, if you see a cartoon, if you see a movie and you're interested in reading more, you've got to kind of convince the parent to take you to a specialty comic shop. And that's, if they can find, there's just so many steps people just forget. Whereas, you watch the G.I. Joe cartoon, you then have nothing to do. You get on your bike, you go out and you go to your nearest gas station convenience store and they're all right there. And it's
do kids still get on their bike? Is this us projecting? Perch?
Oh, it's totally us projecting. Yeah.
Okay.
No, kids are going from one room to the next room and turning on their iPad. It's like,
yeah, exactly. I think it's more like, hey, I saw a G.I. Joe cartoon. I wonder if there's an app that I can get into that'll allow me to get those G.I. Joe, similar G.I. Joe experiences.
Oh, it's totally different. I mean, I love the complete disconnect. My daughters will watch a show and be really kind of frustrated. Like the WandaVision experience is torturous for my daughter, who does not understand why all the episodes are not just available right now, that she can just surf. Waiting that week.
Yeah, that's a cultural concept. Like that's a viewing audience. That's a cultural concept that has been introduced into into the culture. And when you don't do it, people go like, what the heck? Why can't I binge all of that all at the same time, all at once?
It's funny to watch her go. I was like, it's 9 episodes. It's going to be 9 weeks. She's like, I'm going to be dead by then. God, that's forever. Thanks. Thank you.
That's so good.
I
remember that Superman. Remember that Superman.
Blue and red.
And I love that JLA run. Holy cow.
Yeah. We had that. We had there's our crisis issue right there. I
was never a DC kid though, Perch.
No, a lot of people, it's interesting. A lot more people came in from Marvel. I rarely people who as kids came in through DC. And I think the sales kind of reflected that back at that time too.
I started my contact, my pusher of comic books was my eldest cousin, and he had a ton of DC comics. So I grew up on Superman, I grew up on, whatever it was in his collection, Green Lantern, Hawkman, whatever it was in his collection, I would read, right? I didn't necessarily understand what was going on. What is it? All-Star Squadron or something like that. I'd read all that stuff and be like, whoa, look at all of these awesome, super colorful costumes. But comics didn't really click for me until I started reading Marvel books, And maybe it's just, a weird coincidence of like a level of maturity in my head versus the kind of stories that I was reading versus their costumes, But anytime that I would go into DC, I'd be like, I can't get into these stories,
I think it was harder, and depending on your era, if you were 70s and 80s, I think you really had to kind of commit to getting into DC. And I love this Legion of Superhero run. I love the 5 years later Legion. I've talked about that a million times to the point where people are sick. But I was very much, I had bought in. Like there was no casual nature to any of it at that point. I was buying the who's who, binder copies, and I was going through all that.
Sure.
It wasn't easy, I think, to come in, and I think DC probably in the 60s and early 70s had more of that. You could just pick up an issue and it was one and done, and it was easier, and then it got cheaper. But because I don't mean many people who started with DC in the 80s. It's just they all have come through Marvel.
They must have some serious sticking power. Now I'll watch Wes's channel, and I feel like Wes is really into DC Comics, man. Like he's really down for DC Comics. I'm like, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's they come back and forth. I'm pretty happy at this point. I'm also curious how many people are really sticking with I'm all Marvel or I'm all DC. It feels like most people have fragmented and they just like everything. So
that's a good point. Very good point.
It's anyway, some good stuff there at JLA. Here's we had Secret Wars. We also had issue 2 of the original Secret Wars out this week.
Dude, this is so awesome. This is so freaking cool. Look at that cover. Look at that cover for Thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome, dude.
It's I mentioned this last time and I meant to do it this time. I should have, but I'm going to continue to show covers, but I'm also going to show some interiors from these weeks in the past too, because
That would be so awesome.
it's some cool stuff. I always forget how much Mike Zeck was doing back then. Because that's him on Captain America, I believe. That's Zeck. Zeck, of course, was doing Secret Wars. You had just a ton of great stuff here.
Look at that very specific Buscema looking face on that Hulk in the bottom part of Magneto's foot.
Yeah.
In Secret Wars.
Yeah,
that was the standard way you drew Hulk after it's sort of by way of style, right? Like that's how it transitioned off of Kirby and onto the Buscema look. That's pretty cool. Man, this is awesome. This is awesome.
Most of the time, most of these cover artists were the interiors. I mean, it was far more rare for the cover artist to be different from the person doing the interior artwork.
For sure.
And that's definitely not the case today. But anyway, a lot of really good stuff. I never really got into this Indiana Jones though. I love these, but
I probably like it existed for sure. I would see it once in a great while, but I didn't understand it in context. Like I didn't start watching Indiana Jones type of movies until much later, and so I never quite understood. Like that guy's not wearing a cape. That guy doesn't have like cool colors on his outfit.
Yeah, I think that is Chaykin on Indiana Jones. I'm pretty sure.
Without zooming in, it feels like it, right?
Yeah.
Holy crap, man. 60 cents? Get out of here with 60 cents.
Sorry, that's the other piece. You start the sad part throughout all this, you start looking at the price tag and you're like, oh man, 60 cents for almost everything, 75 cents for old Secret Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get out of here with 75 cents. That's awesome.
When you realize that everything on this page is about $5, it's like
Right. That's how I grew my comic book collection, was that I could afford to buy in long boxes in my local comic book store. You wouldn't mark it up all that much, but it would allow me to be a bit more adventurous in buying back issues that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
Like a cover would catch my eye and be like, oh, I wonder what that's all about. I just burned like, a buck, so who cares, right? Even as a markup back and then, like a buck, right?
Well, I had a customer once, and I forget now somebody was mentioning this in the chat a bit ago, that you wouldn't if you're a parent and you have your kids and you're frequently taking the kids in with you to buy comics. I see lots of people who have grown up with comics and they're still coming in to pick up their pull box, whatever. Well, now they've got kids and it's a happy moment. And the kids want to buy comics, but the parent's like, yeah, I'm not going to buy that you're going to tear it up. I'm not going to spend $5 for you to tear it up.
That's a good point.
And I always hear that and I'm like, oh man, this is a kid who potentially would get into comics. It's not going to be, because you're letting them at it.
Right. Again, more barrier to entry. Oh, you know what else is cool? I just realized that, short of maybe that Secret Wars one, but I think that's sort of like the movie poster version. Like a lot of these pieces of art have really a lot to do with what's going on inside the comic.
It's true. Yeah.
That's a lost art and exercise.
It absolutely is. The cover is meant to be kind of something that's going to pop on the shelf. And what's weird is I'd love to have a forum with a bunch of people, and including yourself, to talk about this, because I think there's all these assumptions that just are not true. Like I hear from comic industry people, publishers, that, well, we put Alex Ross on this cover because it will really stand out on the shelf, and it looks amazing. Ross is an amazing artist for sure. But I don't think that holds up, because if you actually go to the shop and try this, any of you, next time you go to a shop, step back and just look at the wall of comics.
Yeah.
You've got 100+ comics on that wall. At that point, the Alex Ross cover kind of vanishes. Like you don't see it anymore. And so you go back to, it'd be nice if the cover was reflecting what was in the comic, because that's far more likely to connect people than some gallery piece that instantly becomes invisible when it's on the shelf.
Yeah, I understand the practice of putting a striking, like a craftsman doing something that is striking, that's sitting up on the shelf. But to your point, you take you're at 3 feet away, right? You ask them to stand back 10 feet, 15 feet. it doesn't hold up very well, you
Yeah.
know. Especially in the day and age, and you said Alex Ross, that's a great example. In a day and age when that sort of cover, not his style, but certainly that level of prestige on a cover is a bit more common these days, right?
It is.
When he was doing Kingdom Come, it really stood out, and I can see an argument for it there,
Yeah.
because you go like there weren't that many comics back then, and at least not in a consistent mainstream, where you'd see a fully painted watercolor, acrylic cover, right?
Mhm.
But nowadays, you're getting the entire. I think you get like painted covers and digital, and
Oh,
you just
sure.
get the whole thing, So it's not unique enough anymore to warrant. Oh, we put Alex Ross on a cover because we know it stands out. You put an Alex Ross cover because of the legacy that is Alex Ross, but in as far as it's standing out, eh,
Sure. Well,
yeah,
and when the comics don't sell through, I'll have to try this experiment next time. I'll go in there and take some photos of some shelves. There's a lot of Alex Ross on the shelf. They're giving him a lot
sure,
of covers to do, and then the comics aren't all selling through. So you're seeing multiple copies of, say, Captain America. You may have 3 issues up there,
yeah,
and so now you're staring at, say, 20 Alex Ross covers,
good
and again,
point.
and it doesn't seem amazing anymore, and it's a shame because he is an amazing artist. So
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
uh,
Is
anyway.
that also the same for somebody like Adam Hughes, who is known for the guy that you put on the cover if you want to move units? Is that still, or at least at the very least, get eyeballs on that unit?
That's where, I mean, Adam Hughes. The thing, and this is, you would know far better than me. Some of these I like Michael Turner back in the day. I think Adam
Sure,
Hughes,
sure.
um, Campbell. I think some of these artists, they'll do the cover, but they'll leave a pretty decent amount of white space around the focal area of the cover, and
Mm,
it
mm.
winds up causing it to pop more on the shelf as a result because
Oh, dude,
you know.
I got stories about that for sure.
Oh, please.
Um,
Yeah.
when I was doing a book, my creator-owned book for Image Comics was called Run Love Kill back in the day, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And there was, I mean, if you recall, this may have been as far back as 10 years ago, maybe less, maybe more. But anyway, the point is that when we were designing the cover when we finally got to the point where it's like, okay, we have enough of these pages done. What are the covers going to look like? And there was this expectation to do what was pretty standard back in the day as far as covers were concerned. So not necessarily this, but more of like, action guys busting each other up, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I said to the team, I think we should build all the characters in 3D and have it lit so that everything is white.
Nice.
Like a fully white cover with just the logo and the characters in 3D holding a gun or doing a pose. And the team like gave me this look like, you're freaking nuts. And I'm like, no. I think there's value in having these covers pop because again, from that, 15 foot back from the wall, from the comic book wall, right? You see the one white cover and it really stands out. And they didn't, I got pushback in the beginning, but as more of these covers started to come out,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it really did resonate with catching people's eyeballs.
I'm going to do this. I'll do it for future shows, and I'll have to get your opinion on it. We'll grab a couple just photos of the shelf, and if you just step back and you look at it from that perspective, you see it instantly.
Yeah, I agree.
It's yeah, no, it's crazy. We go a little bit further back here. I will for whatever reason, I remember that Warlord cover a
Me
bit.
too. Me too.
I swear this comic was on the newsstand for like 2 years because I felt like I kept
Yeah.
seeing this forever.
Wasn't that just the comic book that helped stand up the toys, or was it the other way around?
I'm not sure. The
Hmm.
Warlord is just, there's so many Warlord. Like every week I do this, and there seems like there's always a Warlord comic on here.
Right.
I don't know how many of these things they produce, but I do think it was propping up the toys. But maybe the toys came later. It's just
That's
uh,
so cool.
it's crazy, yeah. But no, there's some great stuff here. This Batman Detective Comics cover is another one. There's a lot of people shooting people in this one.
And the thing is, it's like they understood
Hmm.
the power of those primary colors. They
Oh yeah.
just like it's one color for the most part. Like Superman in that Superman Shazam cover,
Yeah.
there's like 3 colors.
Yeah. No, it's very sparing. I mean, that Detective Comics logo using the white border and everything, I mean, that pops.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
It's so perfectly designed without being overly designed, you know?
Yeah.
That's great.
The Sergeant Rock book, it's drawn to look like a book. There's some neat stuff going on here, and you
Oh,
brought,
look at that. I didn't ever see that.
I'm really I'm noticing it again. It is it's so, all this work done by hand, all the work color separated.
Yep.
It would have, I mean, yeah, there's some heavy effort going into this stuff.
Yeah. That Batman detective, see, like it's being framed by actually Batman himself that they incorporated it into the logo.
Yeah.
You see that?
Cool. I mean, yeah, it's both those books. It's a little bit smaller in the other one, but it's, I don't know.
That's awesome.
There was a cool art here. I do like.
I agree. And I'd see some of these original pages in at conventions at original art dealers tables, and boy, oh boy, it's a small fortune.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something to be said about the worth of doing something traditionally, you know.
And this was, to somebody's question, I believe that is Mike Grell. I believe this is Grell.
Yeah, that's about right. That's the same face that he drew on Green Arrow during that run.
Yeah. And almost all these books,
so cool.
40 cents or 35 cents.
I see 40 and 35, man. I'm like, geez, Louise.
I don't know. I love the time aspect of this all, but yeah.
Holy cow, that's great, Perch.
I think this is the last one, but we'll chat more about art. But there's another John Byrne Web of Spider-Man, and we got that painted gargoyle cover.
Yeah, that's a Bill Sienkiewicz New Mutants cover right there.
Yes, it is.
Who did that? Who did that Web of Spider-Man? Is that John Byrne?
That's John Byrne. Yeah.
Shoot, that's great. That's like a photocopy, a high contrast photocopy of a photo of like buildings in New York that he found.
And I think he was starting to do a lot of that at the time, and he used that for Namor, that style. But
it's cool.
Yeah, it's and I never read Sectars. I have no idea what the plan was there.
Yeah, it's definitely to help stand up to toys.
Yeah,
definitely. I have a buddy, a great YouTuber, buddy of mine named Dan Larson, who does Toy Galaxy.
Oh yeah,
he covers all of this stuff, you know. So anytime, like, he'll cover vintage toys and the comics that help stand it up, and yeah. So anytime I watch his channel, I shift into a different portion of my brain that is nostalgia. When I'm watching your channel, I shift into the portion of my brain that's like, oh, analysis, you know.
Yeah.
So it's always a good smorgasbord in the morning of the kind of YouTube stuff that I watch.
It's amazing to see that we have a Gargoyle limited series, we have an Iceman series, and we have a Beast
right.
series all coming out the same week.
Holy cow! I didn't register that that's an Iceman.
Yeah.
Book. That is an underwhelming logo.
Yes. Yeah, they did not care.
That is an underwhelming logo, man. I just found an article of the logo design for that New Mutants cover, or the New Mutants logo. Like the designer that Marvel brought in to help sort of think about what that New Mutants logo was going to end up becoming, in contrast to what the redesigns for the X-Men logos went through around that time period. That's a fascinating read. Beautiful. It actually helped inform the cover, the logo for Arc Athena, because it's a vintage tip of the hat of that John Byrne run for X-Men.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Somebody has sent me a piece of art, but it's going to take me a minute, so I'm going to stop sharing here real quick, and I'll go over there and I'll grab it. Apparently, there's a piece of art they want me to ask you about. So
yeah. Oh God. I hope it's not mine.
Oh no, it's yours for sure.
It's awful.
No, you'll be just fine. It's cool looking at this stuff. I know it's nostalgia and everything else, but I think there's a lot to learn from these old covers and the process that took place and everything.
Yeah.
Almost here.
I'm trying to keep up with your chat, man. It's going by pretty fast. I hope that I did not miss any questions. If you guys have ones that I missed, please, please, please ask it again. I don't want to seem like I'm ignoring you.
Yeah, we've it's tough to. We've had a lot more people here in the chat this time, and it's growing. And I really appreciate, by the way, everyone stopping by and spend some time with us. It's a good time. But they want me to ask you about, I think, this panel here.
Oof, yeah. I laugh, and I'll tell you a small story, and I'll try to tell it quickly.
Perfect.
But I remember when this era of Spider-Man books that was being told, and you can tell by the way the colorist rendered it, right? This was around Tobey Maguire era Spider-Man, which meant it was the look and feel of what John Romita Jr. was doing on the book, which is like super realistic. They would render the web on his face as if it was like the applied webbing on Tobey Maguire's costume in the live action movies. My editor for this was the same editor that I had worked with back when I did Enter the Mandarin, the Iron Man Enter the Mandarin book. His name is, and I still owe him so much, his name is Stephen Wacker, and he's since moved on to, I think it was Marvel Special Project, but he's in LA.
Yeah.
So he reached out to me again and said, you know, I'd been wanting to draw a Spider-Man book, and he reached out to me and said, hey, I have this thing that is Spider-Man and Deadpool. And Joe Kelly wrote it, who had known of. I think that we had been meaning to work on something together since I think this is Joe Kelly. It can't be Joe Casey. The Joes. Anyway, so
Casey, yeah.
So I said, yeah, I'd love to. Right now, the last Spider-Man that I remember that really, you know, sort of left a mark on me was Todd McFarlane. You know, that was the era of Spider-Man that I was reading consistently. He'd long since been out of the game. This was like, you know, way past Spawn already, you know. So I put to the page this double page spread that it was asked for in the script, channeling the you know, this mental snapshot that I took of that Spider-Man or the Todd McFarlane run, right? And my attitude was, if Steve had said, Eric, this is way too far, you know, like this is our expectancy of Spider-Man. But when he looked at it and he said, like, nah, this is cool, you know, I was like, oh, really? You like Spider-Man with double joints? I'm going to put quadruple joints on him now, you know? So this is the arrogant, you know, I'm not proud to say it, but this is like the super arrogant version of me not understanding the IP, you know, or like not understanding the thing that people are really sort of, you know, they've gotten used to. The people that were reading this, they may have read McFarlane's Spider-Man, but I'm going to guess not a ton of them did. And the expectation was John Romita Jr. doing Tobey Maguire, you know? Yeah. So I delivered these pages, and Steve was like, thanks for coming in on time. This looks great. I'm like, I did all the comedic beats between Spider-Man and Deadpool. That was a lot of fun. And then the shitstorm that happened when this book came out.
But it's so
this was pre-Twitter. This was all message boards. You know what I mean?
Oh, dear.
And my buddy, who was at that time, I was in Rome vacationing, and my buddy was emailing me, or was either texting me or emailing me saying, like, yeah, the message boards hate you.
It's just so, but it's so dynamic. I mean, it is. I mean, it's to be, as somebody said in the chat, to be fair, the you know, anatomy is not 100% accurate here.
Oh, I would definitely, if I had a time traveling machine, like literally like a DeLorean with a flux capacitor, I would hit myself across the head for drawing this thing. I'd be like, do 80% less of what this is, because there is a what do you call it? Again, you have to, like, you know, you've heard the term, like, you know, read the room. You know, like, I should have done a better job of doing that. This was super arrogant. And just like the worst middle finger that I could give to the fans that were reading this book, you know. And it wasn't done maliciously. It was just like, I love Todd McFarlane, and I want to draw my mental snapshot of Todd McFarlane. But there needed to be an extra layer of like self-awareness, you know.
No, this is quite rad. I agree. No, this isn't. You're being way too hard on yourself. This is clearly very stylized, um,
Yeah.
but it's
But people
cool.
hate it, Perch.
I,
Like
I hear
if
you.
I was arrogant enough one time to look up my name and Spider-Man, and this is on some Reddit things like the worst Spider-Man ever drawn.
Oh
And
no.
for a brief second, I was like, oh, that hurts my feelings. And then I went like, oh, that's not so bad. Like, I'm known for drawing one of the worst Spider-Man, but it has the polarizing reaction that chat is going through right now. It's either like, dude, I freaking love this, or
It's
what the
cool.
hell is wrong with you? You know?
I think it's cool. I think
Thanks, man.
comics needs a little bit. I mean, but you're intending to be exaggerated. I think that
Correct.
there's a huge difference. I mean, honestly, like somebody said quite a while ago. I mean, the idea that it's Lady Stiltman is weirder to me than anything drawn.
Yeah. 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 I'm looking at this now and I'm like, man, the colorist did such a great job.
Uh,
Holy cow. Whoever it is that did that, I still owe you money for doing a lot of heavy lifting, helping me out.
it's
But
just
yeah.
it conveys a just a frantic movement and insanity here that I think is really awesome. But anyway, a couple
This is
questions.
awesome.
Ash is asking, what's a book of yours that you're particularly proud of?
Currently, or like if I look back at my body of work, I really liked that Iron Man run back in the day.
Yeah.
That was so much fun. That was like right around the time that the first movie had come out. So imagine that, right? But when
Hmm.
I was drawing that book, I had finally gotten over the idea that everything needed to look as pretty as it did.
Yeah.
I drew that book like I was storyboarding, and that was so much fun. So I'm quite proud of that miniseries.
Nice. That's a great. We'll put some things up. I'll put after this video goes up. I'll put in the description some links to your stuff. You're. I have done a number of interviews, and there's a really cool one coming up that I'm not going to spoil the surprise for. But
Right on.
your stuff's easy to find. Like if you go to Google, you can quickly get to your work, and that's not
Sure.
for a lot of people. So I don't know, little things. I appreciate that. Here's another question. What advice can you give someone who writes and is looking for an artist to work and get into the independent comics? Like how can a writer find an artist today?
How can you find an artist? First of all, set up for yourself as a writer. And I know as a writer, you always one of the challenges like finding that sort of diamond in the rough where you're like, man, that guy is awesome. But
Yeah.
more than likely, somebody like that having enough personal self-awareness is going to cost an arm and a leg. So setting up the right personal the right sort of expectation for yourself, right? Nobody's going to work for free. Understand what your budget is, right? Offer something that's within your budget. If the artist says like, I can't work with that because of X, Y, and Z, thank them for their time and look for the next artist. Conduct yourself like a professional. It goes a long, long way. How do you find the artist? You said based on your expectations and your limitations, you're going to get the artist that you're going to get.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds harsh, but that's real.
No, it's true. It's true. I think you didn't ask. They didn't ask me. They asked you, but I'll throw this out there as
No,
well.
please, yeah.
Understand your budget. I know that there's some people out there who are
Budgets
just
are
getting
big.
started, and they're like, well, I have to afford a $400 per page kind of artist for this book. If it's your first comic, don't do that. Like go
Yeah.
just understand the amount of money you're going to spend.
Mm-hmm.
How about here's this? What are your tips on how to work with watercolors and how to improve one? Do you have any tips there?
Yeah, sure. Paint with pure color. A lot of people have a tendency when they're working with watercolor to sort of mix, and that turns the watercolor into mud. If you can, do your very best to first optimize the fact that the paper is white, and the more pure color that you put onto the canvas, the easier it is for the cleaner the thing looks without getting into the muddy space. Right. But once watercolor starts mixing, there's people who can do it really, really well, but they have a tendency to portion out the water more than they do the pigment. And until you get a better handle on what that looks like, paint with pure color.
Nice. That's very good advice. I struggle so much with watercolor, but
It's a pain in the butt.
it totally.
My wife knows how to do it really, really well. Like if you ever seen the stuff that she's experimenting with now, she's bought like I can't remember how much in US dollars the paper is, but it's the way the water and the pigment sit on the surface for X amount of long. and then suddenly it absorbs, and then like obviously the depending on the amount of money that you're spending on that pigment, it gets really like desaturated and dull. But she knows what she's doing in that space, and it's fascinating to watch her experiment.
The people who know how to do it well, it's incredible.
Oh yeah,
Watching
yeah.
this and watching it come out, it's crazy.
It's magic for sure.
Do you have any high fantasy pieces in your catalog that you've done?
High fantasy pieces? Nope. not that I can think of off the top of my head. And high fantasy pieces, we're talking about like Dungeons and Dragons, and right? Like
I think so.
like
I think that's,
Lords of the Rings. Yeah, I haven't done them in such a long time. I had a book plan that had sort of a comic book plan that I sort of has that those themes in it, but not anything recently.
very, very nice. A lot of good questions here. We're probably wrapping up, or we're winding down. But if anybody
Right on.
things, I have a couple others. What do you listen to when you're drawing?
That's a good one. Mostly these days podcasts. Mostly these days YouTube. I used to like listen to movies, but not so much anymore because there hasn't been any new movies that I'd want to listen nor watch. But yeah, no, like this is gonna sound really nerdy, but there's an engineer on YouTube that talks about like how highways are designed. Like I'm into that guy's channel so much, man. Like I like learning how things work. And if my stepfather were here,
Awesome.
He'd get a good laugh, because he was trying to introduce that to me earlier on in my life, and I couldn't be caught dead listening to any and all of that. But nowadays I'm all like, how are there's like storm fronts being designed, storm breakers being designed. Anyway,
that's awesome. Can you draw Purchase comics so it's not terrible? Oh, thank you, Mumbles. I appreciate it.
Are you doing a comic, Perch?
I am.
That's so awesome, dude.
Yes, and yes, it will be terrible. But I've got quite a few things going. And again, I'm waiting for some people to clear some things so we can announce it. But lots.
I am so freaking excited for it. If there's anything that I can do to help, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm happy.
I will pay you quite a bit of money to do whatever I do. Yes, Mumbles never change. It's an interesting question. It's why are we not seeing top talent on more consistent books like monthlies? It's a tricky question, but it's I think what you're getting at here is that you don't get artists on runs for long. Like you won't see a single artist for more than a couple issues, and then they're replacing with a different artist. And a lot of the big names are now doing covers or very occasional issues. And so the question is, why don't we see more of that? Is it just come down to money and speed?
Maybe have comics recently. First of all, it's strange for me. I have to think about like what top talent means, right? Because that's a subjective slider that you can go either left and right on, right? Like, but I also have to ask, like, have comics deprioritized? And are they talking about like artists and writers, or just artists exclusively? I missed it, Perch.
I think more artists. I do. And if you want to clarify the question here, jump in. I can put in there. But it is more of a. I do notice there is a style, and I think it's a little bit more at Marvel now than DC. But you don't see artists on runs for very long. I mean, Chris Bachalo's on nonstop Spider-Man. Take your bets. I imagine he's going to. What's funny is I talk to a lot of these artists, and I'm friendly with many of them. More of them should come and do interviews like you are. Thank you again, Eric, for doing it.
Sure.
And they'll say things like they would love to have a longer contract. It's not their choice. It's not the artist.
Yeah.
It's the company. And
that's what I was about to say. Was like, have they deprioritized art that much where they're kind of like, okay, well, we're going to move on to the next? Are they stacking these projects almost like, near the end and at the beginning of certain contracts, so that there's never a drop off? You know what I mean? Like, I know that these monthly schedules are pretty rigorous. They're unforgiving, and you would hope that the reason why these artists aren't getting as many runs is because well, you wouldn't hope that, but like maybe the attitudes have shifted to like, you know, we're worried more about getting these books out rather than having artists do runs, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm going to guess it has a lot to do with money.
Yeah, I definitely think money plays into it.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking, have you ever done any album covers, any type of album covers?
Not that I can think of. At one point, I was in talks of doing something for Daft Punk. This was a long time ago.
That would have been
but
awesome.
I don't remember. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know, before we kind of start to head out, anything else? I'm putting up right there. You are absolutely insane if you aren't subscribed to Eric's channel. It's an amazing
You're very kind.
I'm telling you. And I am almost always there watching your stuff. I don't like to actually pop up in the chat because the attention needs to be focused on what you're doing. But
Thanks,
I'll put it on my TV and just watch off the Apple TV. Your streams they're incredible. I can't stress enough.
Thanks, dude. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
this was a lot of fun.
We have to do it again. I would love, actually, let's do, I know Sean Murphy wants to come back on again. I think it'd be so much fun to have both of you on together. That would be just a fun show.
Man, I'd love to catch up with that guy. The most I ever do is like a series of texts telling him what an amazing job he's doing with his campaigns. Great interview that he had with you a few weeks back. So it'd be great to be able to catch up with him.
I think his plot holes book I think is going to be very good. I may have seen pieces of it. It's I'm so thrilled to see. I think it's just amazing. But
that was very subtle, Perch.
Yeah, sorry. There's so much good stuff going on right now, and I'm not in the mood to. I try not to shill things, but certainly, as I mentioned earlier, today Joe has his book out. Call your shop, and if no other reason, the comedy of getting your local shop to find out what Mad Cave is as a publisher, because I think a lot of these smaller guys, they don't know. It would be funny.
Yeah, well, they should, right? Like through awareness of people who are calling about it through shops, that would be amazing. That would be an amazing groundswell.
Anyway, Eric, thank you very much for spending all the time with all of us.
Thank you, dude.
Amazing conversation, and I hope we'll get to catch up more very soon.
Absolutely. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, man. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you, everybody in the chat. If you feel inclined, hit the like button, but I'm just glad you came here, and we'll talk to you all soon.
No, hit the like button. Come on, do it. Do it.